G'day, welcome to the Financial Bloke Podcast, the podcast for people seeking the wisdom needed to grow their family's wealth and live a happier, healthier and more prosperous life. My name's Ben Law and I am the Financial Bloke. I've always been intensely fascinated with people who see the world through a different lens to most of the population. They think and they act differently and choose to take their own path in life. This means that before they become outwardly successful, they're often vastly underestimated and quite often misunderstood. They are happy to fail and learn, and sometimes people write them off as being dreamers. My observation over my career as a financial advisor was that more often than not, they're the ones that become wildly successful. They're what we call entrepreneurs, and they're the people you need to take notice of and who you can learn the most from. Now, don't get me wrong, thinking and doing things differently to everyone else is a choice that can make your life harder and riskier at times, but the rewards have the potential to be exceptional. I believe we all naturally have a little entrepreneur in us. It just needs to be fed and nurtured. It could be an engineer that starts an online business making, say, jigsaw puzzles, the grazier that starts a trekking company on their property, a farmer that starts a millinery business, the bank manager that starts an online vet supply business, or an accountant that starts a surf label. I wasn't born a natural entrepreneur. I was taught to get an education, get a good job, and work hard at that for my whole career, and that's where my success would come from. For some, that's their recipe for success, and good on them. But for me, it didn't quite feel right. It took a lot of years for me to admit it, but I am an entrepreneur at heart, and now in many ways I think differently to most people, and I have to say, I really enjoy that. That brings me to our guest today, Jeff Birchnell. Jeff and I both grew up in northwest New South Wales and we've been mates since we were kids. Jeff started his involvement with the beef industry at age 9 when he established Avignon Cattle Co., which evolved into 3R Livestock. Jeff's really unique in my eyes, as when you carefully listen to him, you get to understand that due to his varying experience, his insights and ideas slightly differ from the average person, and that's why I always love having conversations with Jeff. Jeff's a qualified chartered accountant with over a decade's experience, has been involved in exporting beef to China. He was a strategic analyst for a large beef production business, which was one of the few who managed to successfully raise capital from a large overseas super fund, and he's also a beef producer himself as a director of 3R Livestock. He's also served on various industry boards such as the Cattle Council of Australia, and he's been a director of Herefords Australia, the Future Farmers Network, and a number of other committees or organisations. So you sort of get that Jeff will have a unique view on the world because he has a balance between technical and practical experience. Even if you're not a business owner or a farmer, this podcast will be for you because if you want to find success on whatever path you take, it will require you to listen to people from all walks of life because getting a glimpse into their unique perspective could be the push you need to rethink and refocus what you're currently doing, maybe take action on that business idea you've got, or for some, even a career change. Today, Jeff and I will be discussing why Jeff felt compelled to quit a lucrative professional accounting career and how a combination of strategic thinking and following your passion will help you find unlimited motivation and a purpose in your life. So on that note, we better get cracking. Welcome, Jeff.
G'day, Ben.
Mate, so it's obvious you love agriculture and cattle, and that's why you're so heavily invested in 3R, and it's why you also get on well with my dad. But I'd like to start right now with how you got to the point of leaving a safe and lucrative career in accounting, and what it is about you that let you leave a safe and secure professional career as an accountant and, for the lack of a better term, take the entrepreneurial route.
Yeah, okay, Ben. Well, as you know, I mean, we've known each other for many years now, and I think I was born with a passion for livestock, and that was sort of rare in my family. I don't come from a family of agricultural producers. I was born in Newcastle and raised down there till I was 9, but I've always just had this burning love of agriculture and cattle in particular. So look, the accounting career was a good career. I enjoyed it. I worked alongside agricultural producers and had clients throughout in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and most of them were farmers. But at the end of the day, my passion always lay in being a farmer rather than talking to farmers all the time. So you use the word safety there, and I suppose to others it was a leap of faith, but to me, it's what I always wanted to do. It's what I was passionate about, and I always hoped that I would get in that position to leave accounting, take the skills with me, but get into the beef industry full time, and I've done that. So I don't necessarily think safety's probably played, well, it did. It does play a part in your decision, but it wasn't paramount in my decision.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you do it while you're young. You take the risk, because as you get older and, you've got the kids now and married with kids, it makes it a little bit harder as you get older because the commitments build and you don't have the ability to take that risk, do you?
I think that's exactly right. And I think opportunity does run away from you a little bit. And because, when you're breeding cattle, it's a long pursuit. And no matter if you've been doing it for 30, 40, 50 years, you probably always feel like you need that again to get to where you want to go. So to me, stepping over and trying to do that when I was 50 or 60, I just think the horse had bolted. So I was always mindful to do it when I still had a few good years in the tyres, and that's what I did.
Yeah, and it would have been a really good apprenticeship too, in the sense of, you'd grown up with cattle, so you had a really good understanding of how that all worked, but getting an apprenticeship in something that was completely different from, the practical side of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone recognises that accounting skills are of value, no matter what you do with them. And I always thought too that knowing cattle and knowing the core of many of these producers' businesses and how they actually worked and what they did was a great bridge to take the insight from both how they operate their business, the financial aspects of their business, and combine those two together. So I always felt like I was learning, and I was fortunate to have some insight into some really wonderful producers and people. And I got along great with them, and I worked with them for 8 or 10 years, and I learned a lot along the way. So yeah, I took with me not only the skills of accounting, but also some experience and being able to have a look under the hood of many agricultural businesses.
Yeah, and I suppose that's really important is you would have got to have seen, like I suppose I did, the differences, or you'd start to feel the differences over time between, the really bad producers or the really bad business owners, the average and mediocre, and then the really exceptional. And for me as a financial advisor, I could almost smell it, the difference when someone would walk into my office. I could really tell who were the people that were moving forward and doing really well and those that weren't. Did you find that was something those sort of anecdotes or facts almost you collected over time and were able to apply those?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. No, and look, I think it comes down to passion. And I mean, if you love what you do, you'll always do it better and strive for more. And in any industry, there's people that are deeply passionate about it, and then there's the ones there that probably aren't so passionate. So, I just saw that shine through all the time, and it's something that I've always taken as a bit of a mantra going forward, that if you love what you do, you'll do it well. And if you don't love it, don't do it, because go and find something that you will love doing.
Yeah. Well, it becomes a grind over time, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. Now, interest rates are at historical lows. It's raining for most people, not everyone, but it's raining through most parts of the country. Beef and lamb prices are at all-time highs, and the pessimists out there might be saying things like it can't get any better, it can only get worse from here. Now, I don't believe that, but I'd like to get your perspective on why you're so optimistic on the future of ag in Australia, because you've got both that practical and financial background.
Yes. Well, look, one thing I will say is I feel like in the past, a couple of consecutive droughts and some tough years, we probably lost a generation of agricultural producers. And I saw that a lot, in my industry, and also from the accounting perspective. You had that aging farmer population, but now the tap is full on for young people to get into this industry. And I'm seeing people coming from backgrounds that weren't necessarily ag production, the classic sort of, move into ag. And I just think that's so exciting. I mean, it's water in a dry river. It brings so much life to our industry. I think we produce a great product. I'm very confident with how we produce it. I've been fortunate to go to many places in the world, and I can tell you what, the Australian beef that we are producing is absolutely world class. And people recognise that. We probably don't give it enough credit for how good it actually is. But you go into China and some of those places, and we're producing the product they want. We've got a great industry. We've got a great framework to operate in that industry. And I'm just so excited for the future. I just think that all the struggles over the last sort of short period with the drought, and even a little bit longer than that, when you start getting consecutive droughts. I mean, today I'm not looking backwards. I'm looking forward and I'm seeing a wonderful place to spend your life and your pursuits in the future.
And also the demand for protein seems to be growing exponentially. I mean, I read something the other day, and I'm not going to quote any figures because I can't remember, I might be making them up, but around the middle class that's coming through in the developing world, and how they're starting to demand more protein, and there is, through various factors, shortage of protein around the world, swine flu, etc. I mean, that must be playing into the fact that there's a solid demand base for agricultural products that are not only quality but also a lot safer, because we're produced in Australia, where we've got good biosecurity, etc. situations.
I think so, Ben. I think, as I say, we operate in a great framework, but at the end of the day, who doesn't love a steak or a barbecue or, some good Australian produce? I mean, it's a delightful product. Do with it what you will, but the product won't let you down. It's absolute quality.
Yeah. Another thing I just want to touch on, which you mentioned before, was the flowing back of younger people into agriculture. And I've noticed a shift over probably the last 6 or 7 years is some of the people that I dealt with, and I dealt with some producers that were very successful and very humble, and people wouldn't necessarily know their names out there. They're not the ones in shining lights. And one of the things I saw change was kids were starting to get encouraged to come back into agriculture. So they were saying things like, years ago, it used to be get off. Like my mum used to say to me, go get a job, get a trade, and don't be like us, get out of the agriculture game. It's too hard. Whereas families are now going, there's an opportunity here, and actively encouraging their kids to come back, which I think is also helping. There's a lot more positivity out there from the older generation wanting people to take over now, that they can clearly see a path to not only financial security but happiness.
Yeah, I think so, and I think everyone probably got stuck in a mindset of thinking there was greener pastures elsewhere, and encouraging their kids to go. And in most towns that you go to, there'll be a shortage of those sort of producers now that are running the business, be it in their late 40s to 50s. I think that demographic is just not there. But now I think a lot of the older generation in their, getting close to retirement are encouraging maybe their grandchildren to come back, or they're certainly innovating different ways that they want the lifestyle. They might not want to work quite as hard, but they can see that, it's something they want to stay a part of in some capacity. And wherever it keeps raining and the grass is green, the allure of retiring to the coast, I think, is just not quite as strong as it was.
Yeah, and I think also too, the next generation coming, focusing more heavily on, from your point of view, from the financial side of things. So running not only the business from an operational point of view, putting bulls out with cows, planting crops, they're also looking at it from a strategic business planning point of view. They're thinking about intergenerational transfer. They're thinking about retirement planning for themselves. And you really see that starting to flow through in my old business. Was you'd see people that had gone through succession plans and had a bit of a mess, now trying to set themselves up financially in the future. So they're leaning more heavily on their accountants, the quality ones, financial advisors, lawyers, etc., which I think can only be good for the industry from not only an innovation point of view. They're thinking about things differently, but they're starting to try and optimize what they're doing.
Yeah, yes, and as you know, as a financial planner in the industry, you get to that point where all of these things are really nice to have, the off-farm assets and whatever else, and building wealth and, saving for a rainy day and all those sort of things. But at the end of the day, that requires a consistently profitable business to underpin those. Everyone knows investing's for the long term. So people can't be putting some dollars away and then drawing them back as soon as it gets a little dry. I mean, and I just think that all this innovation and the business acumen that people are running these businesses with is strengthening that business so it's more resilient, and they don't have to call on all these hollow logs that may come back in at inopportune times. And it just gives fluidity to building those off-farm assets. So I think the confidence is really good in the agricultural game, Ben. I think people are looking out, 0 to 10 years with immense opportunity. And like I say, I think everyone's in the saddle for a very good little period ahead.
Yeah. Now, I know you're into 3R livestock, which is your cattle business, boots and all. And I know that 3R isn't your average buy some bulls, buy some cows, put the bulls out with them and breed some cattle. So can you give me a bit of a take on what 3R is all about, and maybe dig into what you see that other people don't?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Well, 3R is obviously my business. At the face value, it's a seed stock business. So for people that aren't familiar with that term, that basically means pedigree cattle. So the cattle have got papers. We know their generations for, infinitely long previously. Where 3R is perhaps a little different is we rely very heavily on embryo transplant and breeding technologies. So we've got a core herd of about 50 donor cows. We extract embryos out of those cows. We then implant those embryos into what we call recipient cows. So a recipient cow would typically be a non-known pedigree cow, still a good cow. We just don't know what she is. She's not stud value. And we're on the way to doing about 1,000 of those next year. We did about 550 this year. So as you can see, when you take a small group of really elite cattle and through that embryo technology, you can artificially breed 1,000 cows. Now, of that, maybe 650 of them will have calves. So the way that it flows from a donor cow, she might have 10 or 13 or 15 or 20 calves this year, which is obviously impossible in the normal breeding pasture. So why we do that is because we can accelerate the progression of what we consider to be superior genetics, and therefore we can take those animals and those bulls, we can sell them out and create quite a significant genetic impact into the commercial cattle environment. We do that across 3 types of cattle. So we've got Angus cattle, which are well known, and most people will be familiar with that. We do it with Hereford cattle, which ours in particular are a nucleus of Hereford cattle from a research project in Montana in the USA, which has been going for about 85 years now. We do it with pole Hereford cattle, which are Hereford cattle without the horns, so naturally polled. So although we run those 3 breeds, we breed them all on the same principles and the same breeding philosophy, and we just multiply those genetics out, and that gives us more scalability in the business, and it allows the genetic impact of that year's production to be far superior and far more robust than it would be under a traditional system.
So basically, the technology has allowed someone like yourself to come to not have 100 years worth of family experience and a herd being built up over 50 years or 40 years to be able to get a foothold and do well. You can basically source the genetics, you can multiply the genetics, and then be able to supply a more consistent product to the market over time. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. We were very fortunate with our timing to be acquiring those elite donor cows in the middle of the drought. So we bought them in 2018, 2019 with this vision that it would rain and times would be better. We didn't probably anticipate that they would be this good, but at that point in time, we were driving up driveways to buy those genetics, and we weren't passing too many cars because it was hell. And the producers, through our relationships and the way we went about it, we were able to buy some, very good cattle, and we've worked with those people thereafter to continue to produce, what we consider to be sort of elite genetics.
And so, what sort of scale are you looking at to get to, Jeff? I mean, obviously, you talked about 1,000 embryos, that's a bloody lot of embryos to harvest and process. And what's the scale you see you need to get to? And again, you're looking at this from not only a producer's point of view, but an accountant's sort of point of view. Where's the scale get to where you will feel like you've hit? Well, maybe there's some stages. Maybe it's where we get to a point where we feel like we've got a good amount, then we get to the ideal amount, and then we get to too many. Is there sort of some numbers around that, Jeff, for you? Today's episode is brought to you by AgriCoach. You've worked bloody hard over the years and you've built a solid operation. But as your children grow up and start their own journeys, you're beginning to think about the next 5, 10, and even 15 years and how to keep driving the business forward and ensure a smooth and successful succession plan. Preparing the business, preparing the next generation, and preparing for your eventual retirement all requires a solid plan and a proven process. Unsure about the right steps to take? Head on over to agricoach.com.au/webinar to learn more about our Succession Proof Your Family webinar. AgriCoach, aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. And now, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, there is, Ben. This year, 2022, we'll have about 350 calves born. Next year, we'll have 650. So Obviously, half of those are male and would be bulls, and half female, obviously. So within 5 years, I want to be producing 500 bulls a year. With the females that we're getting, we're building a herd of about 500 sort of elite type cows. But I want to be selling in 5 years, I want to be trying to produce and sell 500 bulls. And then within the next 5 years after that, I hope to get to 1,000. And I think at that point, mate, well, not at that point. Throughout the whole thing, you let the economics be part of the vision, that you have to be profitable and you have to be mindful of scale hurdles and scale benefits. So the accounting function, or the way I think about it, is relevant at all points. But I do think that we have the ability and the place to get to 1,000 bulls within, I would say, 8 years, 7 to 8 years.
Okay. And I'm guessing that, knowing you, Jeff, for quite a long period of time, it's not just about breeding 500 bulls or 1,000 bulls. There's more to this story than that. You've got all the females, you've been in the beef exporting game. You've seen the scale from having investors come from overseas, super funds, et cetera, and invest in the ag industry. Where do you see the other opportunities once you've managed to get that scale?
Yeah, well, Ben, a large portion of those bulls I hope to be going, and this is our target market, to like-minded commercial cattle producers. So when I say like-minded, I think I would describe that as having a similar breeding philosophy to where we are headed. So we are not trying to breed high-marbled, long-fed Japanese export Angus cattle. I mean, that's just not what we're trying to do. We're trying to produce basically an animal that survives on grass, functions in our environment, so in Tamworth or further north, so a variable environment. We are trying to finish that beef for the domestic market, so a marble score 2 to 3, 100 days grain-fed, all grass-finished, and hitting that really good eating experience that, that I'm going to guess that you would typically buy at your butcher shop, or would be exported into the likes of the new UK trade agreement. So we've got to know what we're trying to do, and that's what we're trying to do. So our producers that we work with would have a very similar vision. From their production, we are trying to work with them alongside to value add that. So rather than them just using our bulls and that being the end of the arrangement and, see you again next year, we're trying to value add and market and help them market those cattle for the highest possible return. So we're in the process of actually building a feedlot and feeding some cattle, and those cattle will be cattle from our genetics, which will, in one aspect, provide us with a better data loop, but it also puts us in the market to be able to support the producers that support us. And then from that, we integrate into the supply chain. We've got some discussions going on about what we do with that product. And again, it will be focused on hitting those producers on that retail shelf that are after that short-fed, marble score 2 to 3, really good eating experience piece of Australian beef.
That was something you said just a few minutes or a little bit back, was you said targeting the commercial market, because what I've seen, a lot of the complaints from commercial breeders over the years has been the fact that stud producers are breeding for other stud producers. So what happens is you end up getting a product that's not necessarily totally focused on being commercial on a larger scale. So is this doing the feedlot trials, et cetera, all part of getting feedback so that you can adjust your genetics? Because I'm guessing there's the whole, well, we can produce this product and we can source the right genetics, but then when it gets out on the field or on the paddock, you can then you're able to get the feedback to be able to go, well, gee, that worked, that didn't work. We need to focus on a different area heavily, et cetera. Is that all part of that process to continually improve?
I think there's two aspects to that question, Ben. And the first I would say is that we need to have balance. And this is not specific to cattle, it's specific to everything you see in the natural environment. Everything's got balance. So typically, without man being involved in it, you will not see extremes in nature. So we've got to come back to that sort of, how do we produce cattle that are going to work, whether you buy them at Corindi or someone buys them at Cloncurry. And for the most part, the same functional traits are always going to be there, or they're not going to be there. So we're not about extremes. We're not about either end of the bell curve. We're producing a product which is going to work across this country. I think that's front of mind that we need to remember. The second part of that is around the cattle, and the mindset has to be the same. So the mindset, no matter any animal we're breeding, has to be the same. So when you talk about commercial people feeling a little left behind by the stud focus and focusing on breeding the next super, AI sire. I think that's really interesting. I was fortunate to visit Gardner Angus in Kansas in 2019, and a great comment was made on that visit. It was along the lines of that we're producing 3,000 bulls a year. If a stud or an AI company want to go in and select that bull for their purpose, that's all well and good. But the other 299 are bred for the commercial cattle industry. I think you'll naturally have those ones that might appeal to different people a little bit more, but it's about the 299, not the one.
And look, if I tied that back into financial advice, we always used to talk about consistency. So it's not about getting the biggest return in the market. You just want to get a consistent return each year. You get stability, longevity, etc. So I think that sort of ties into your point.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the trials, what are you trying to test for in the trials in the feedlot? What's the drivers you're looking for?
Well, the trial's too multifaceted. So with the embryo transplant, one thing that you would note from, or you might have picked up from the last earlier discussion, was when a cow is having 10 calves during the year, that's an extraordinary production for a cow. So you get a lot of cross-sibling sort of comparisons. So you might be able to see how that cow as a base has actually performed with different sires. So you can compare those animals, but you also get to see on the same live experiment, how that steer in the feedlot or that bull, how his sister's performing. Is she fertile? Is she reaching, good weight in a paddock setting? So it's all about just getting those different data points and saying, well, is the animal that we're producing actually functional on a balanced perspective for the commercial cattleman? And, in the feedlot specifically, we're looking at weight gain, we're looking at carcass quality, we're looking at fat levels, we're looking at muscling, and ultimately MSA grading. But equally important is his sister. Is she in calf? Is she holding up? Is she gaining? And so you pull those two data sets together and you get great insight into the fact that, well, are these genetics actually working? Was it a good choice to use that sire on that cow? And then you take that forward and say, well, okay, well, how do we make a better choice in the future? And how do we actually enact more positive change rather than just doing the same thing over and over again and hoping that one year that cow has a good calf? Well, we're accelerating that and saying, well, in this year, how did the calves do? And how do we breed her for the next year? So her 10 calves next year, how do we make sure that 9 or 10 of those are really good, high-performing cattle, not one on a fluke?
What sort of feedback do you need, or you're going to aim to try and get from the consumers of your product? So in other words, beef producers that use the genetics, what's the sort of information you're wanting to get back that you can't necessarily test on a smaller scale?
Well, I think that comes back to the profitability drivers, mate. And in commercial cattle breeding enterprises, they consist of fertility, turn-off weight, so be that weaners or yearlings, and then the one that's a bit harder to measure, but is obviously longevity and maternal function. So working hand in hand with people to say, well, okay, we don't want to have secrets. If the bull didn't work, let us know. And if he did work, great, but how do we ultimately get them more money in their production, but also their herd? How do we make it last longer? How do we make sure that 40% of their cows aren't going to market every year? How do we get that down to calves for age rather than calves for bad feet, bad udders, bad eyes, and all those sort of things? So it's an overall profit experiment. It's not, it's multifaceted. It's not single trait selection, but the outcome is hopefully a better, more profitable business for them, and ultimately an easier to run business for them, and a herd that they're ultimately proud of.
And so I remember you talked at one stage, we were chatting about how long it takes for a cow to pay herself off.
Yep.
And you were talking about longevity. You just want to touch on that because I found that really interesting.
Yes, yeah. Well, in most times, you have to get a cow to 6 or 7 years old before she pays for herself and the investment that, and when I say that, it's the investment that you've put into that heifer. So you've retained a heifer. So you haven't sold her as a yearling. You haven't sold her as a weaner to start with or a yearling. You've put 2 years of maintenance into her. So you've fed her grass or forage or whatever it's been. She's then raised a calf for another year, and you've probably sold that calf when that cow's rising 3-year-old. So You've invested 3 years. Your first output's at the end of 3 years into her, and then with a normal sort of a production overhead cost on that cow, it'll be a third or fourth calf before you are back ahead of what you would have got if you had sold that cow as a weaner straight off mum and not gone through that process. So
that's a long time.
It is a long time. So what you need to make sure of is she still in the herd at 6 or 7 years old? Has she been fertile enough to raise those 3 or 4 calves? Because if she doesn't, you're just pushing that out further. So she might have to raise 5 calves. So if she hasn't raised 3, the likelihood of her raising 5 or 6 and getting back ahead is not very high. So it's fine to say that we're breeding these cattle for these extremities and these, huge marbling figures and whatever else. But the reality is, with the antagonisms in selection traits, a balanced cow that lasts 3 calves, 4 calves, 6 calves is more valuable to a commercial producer than a one-hit wonder where you sell the steers off and the cows follow within 6 months because they don't go in calf or they fall apart.
Yeah. And people obviously producers do understand that, but it's sort of, you've crunched the numbers, shall I say, over the years and seen this. And it's really interesting to hear the facts around the numbers of how long that lasts going forward. Yep. So obviously longevity becomes, or useful longevity becomes really, really important in your longer term wealth building.
Oh, absolutely. If you're turning over a large percentage of your herd every year because they're falling out through not going in calf, all those sort of things I've just mentioned, I tell you what, no one's making enough money to do that because you're slugged with transport costs, you're slugged with labour, you're slugged with and all those sort of costs that are building that overhead. And at the end of the day, you're not getting the income from those 40 cows. So it's a one-way street.
Yeah. Also, too, I just want to touch on the acceleration of this process you're going through. So, you talked before about if you have a cow, you put a bull out with it, you get a calf, 10 years later, you've had 10 calves, but now you're getting 10 calves in a year or whatever it might be. I mean, it might sound a little bit obvious, but to ask this question, and maybe I'll look a bit stupid, but how far do you think you're jumping forward genetically by being able to do the embryo transfer and the larger scale? How much quicker are you doing it than you could do it the traditional way, I suppose, is what I'm asking. Is it a 10 times where we're 10 years ahead every year, or is it not quite like that?
Well, essentially you are. In a pure production sense, you're breeding as many calves out of that cow as you would probably have in a lifetime, typically in 1 year. Now, on the recip herd, when you're putting in to a commercial non-pedigree cow, you're putting an egg from an elite donor cow with elite genetics. She's having a calf that cow has no potential to ever produce because that cow just does not carry those genetics. So she's calving, raising, weaning a calf that's got, in most times, like immensely more value than that cow ever could. So yeah, evaluating that cow for a start. But I think we need to be mindful of, when you talk about sort of your question, the undertone was probably progress and how fast are we going ahead. I'm probably 80% of our cattle are not bred to the yearling bull that's meant to be the hottest thing in the market because he's progress. We're more about the proven bull that is actually going to enact change in a herd for the better.
So it's growing supply rather than changing the product.
Yes. So we're often trialing those new bulls, but it's only on a sort of 15, 20% of our calves aside by that. And if one of them goes on to be a standout, well, that's great. We've been there on the ground floor. But what's more important is that a lot of those bulls end up being train wrecks, and I don't want to have 80% of my herd culled in 1 year because that bull didn't do it. I'd rather someone else take that risk. Next year or the year after, when his daughters are coming into production, I've got some faith in that bull. Then I'll use him
more heavily, yeah. And I think that it also basically allows you, you get a really good bull, really good cow, you get a calf, and you think that calf's going to be a world beater, and then you get not a great calf every year, and you keep thinking, oh no, but the cow was really good, the bull was really good. We're going to eventually get a world beater, and you never do. Whereas if you can start breeding 10 a year, for example, out of that one animal, you can pick up very, very quickly if this is going to be a good fit or not.
Yes, and the other thing with my breeding philosophy too is I aim for bulls that are from a deep pedigree of cows that have, basically tick the box of what I'm trying to achieve. So typically, if a bull comes onto the market and his dam's a 2-year-old cow, well, I can't build great faith in her as an ability, and I'm not comfortable knowing that I want to replicate and have basically her influence over the course of 50 or 100 cows in my herd. So I'm sort of looking for those bulls that are, probably just getting a little bit older. Their mum's been a bit successful. She's bred more than one calf. She's got that longevity that I'm trying to get. And the bull might be 3 or 4 years old when I use him. He might be older than that, but yeah, I'm not concerned with not having the flashest or the first calf on the market. I'm concerned with having 20 or 30 of his calves that are solid and will do what we want in the sale.
Yeah, not the one-off world beater. It's the consistent supply. Now, Jeff, you also mentioned to me a while ago about doing some, how should we say, trials around some, was it Angus, Brahman cross, etc. Do you want to touch on that a little bit, the trials that you're starting to look into? Because again, this is this bigger picture thing for you.
Yeah, mate. They're known as, it's a Brangus Angus cross, and it's known as an ultra black. So an ultra black is, just in very broad figures, would be 80% Angus blood content and 20% would be Bos Indicus influence, so Brahman. What we're doing and trialing is basically traditional ultra black, so 80% Angus content. We're actually then going halfway and saying, okay, well, how do we use an ultra black bull over an Angus cow, which is 90% Angus content? And then we compare them to 100% pure Angus. So as we all know, and Bos Indicus and Brahman cattle have been tremendously successful of their foraging ability, their ability to survive in Australia's harsh outback. But what we're trying to do there is hone in to say, well, based on your environmental conditions, what is your optimal Angus content? And we say Angus content because Angus are both a recognisable brand, but they've also got there out of the quality of their cattle in many respects. I mean, an Angus influenced animal will generally eat very well. The cows are fertile. So underpinning that experiment with the Angus is a good solid base, but then just working on, more of that optimization rather than just again, that blanket sort of throw a bull out with the cows.
Yeah, so trying to work out what the optimal point is, because I'm guessing there's certain traits you want to pick up for the different environments, and so how much Bos Indicus do we actually need in the animals to survive and thrive versus how much can we get away with not having?
Exactly, Ben, and like many people are trying to make the Angus influence as much as they can, but ultimately those bulls have to go out and survive in those tough environments. So how do we make sure that that's achieved, but also the progeny out of those bulls are, meet that market demand and those specifications to go into the feedlot or grass finishing or wherever it may be. So it's just about that optimization and just actually looking into it and testing it and seeing in different environments where that optimization point sits.
Why the hell are you doing this?
Why?
Why are you doing it? Like, I'm interested. I'm sincerely interested. I mean, you've obviously got a lot on your plate with breeding the program you've got. I mean, it's a big goal. What's driving you personally to then take on this other project and start to experiment? Because I'm fascinated.
Oh, Ben, I think it's just about that unlocking what we don't know. And the progress in the industry over the last 200 years has been, quite phenomenal. But where do we go from here? And I think it is about that optimization and those superior genetics and working out and testing it as we go to make sure that more people that are using these bulls and the commercial producers are getting better feedback. So, yeah, I don't see it as hard work. I see it as exciting. I see it as something that we can, find out some really good information from. But ultimately, I don't think of it as hard work. I'm excited and I'm interested in what the outcome is. Yeah,
because it's really interesting. Why I ask this is there's lots of young kids out there. And when I say young kids, I'm 44 now, so anyone and below 40 is young. And there's a lot of younger people out there that are looking to do something exciting and interesting and different and cutting edge. And that's why I like to ask the questions. You've not just got this whole program around embryo transfer, AI, etc., sourcing genetics from overseas, from all different areas, analysing all the data, setting up a feedlot to do it, looking at scale, doing negotiations with supply chains, doing research into the ultra blacks, etc. I mean, that's a whole lot of stuff you're taking on board, and a lot of people would be intensely interested to hear that story. So that's why I'm asking the questions.
Yeah, look, Ben, right at the start we spoke about passion. I think you either want to do it or you don't, and I'm passionate about it. I want to do it. And I don't feel like my plate's full.
Well, you got 3 kids, mate, so it should be full. Now, this is a question I've asked you before, and you're a bit sheepish around it. You said you don't like to look back, but I still want to ask it to you, Jeff. And I ask this for the people that are younger listening, or parents that have got kids that are coming through. You're in your late 30s now. You've got 3 kids. You're married. You've got commitments. You've got a lot of experience under your belt. If you had to look back at 20-year-old Jeff and you're sitting in a room with him, what would be some of the advice you'd give him? And if you don't feel comfortable giving Jeff advice, what would you give some young lady or some young man along the path that's heading into a career back in agriculture? What's some advice you give them?
Yeah, I would just tell them it's a magnificent life. It really is. It lights me up every day. There's nothing I want to do in my life more so than this.
Yeah. And so I suppose that the world's a good place, but it's going to require a lot of hard work, isn't it? And I think it's not just physical hard work, like getting on the end of a shovel or riding a horse around or driving a tractor for 24 hours a day. There's going to be a lot of hard work strategically planning, thinking about opportunities, making mistakes, and going from there, I think is what I've noticed over time. And I want to touch on one little thing there, Jeff, that's popped into my head is making mistakes. I have made a lot of mistakes in my time. I like to call them lessons, because I'm pretty happy where I am today. And those mistakes have been what has got me to where I am. So how do you feel about mistakes?
Yeah, I probably don't hold a fear of failure. I'm not held back by the fact that I might make a mistake. And I'm entirely respectful, but I see a lot of people that probably are. And I don't know whether for that person, their success will be on after the 3rd mistake. I don't know if it'll be after the 10th mistake. I don't know if they'll never make a mistake, but I'm going to guess that you will, and I'm going to guess that you have to grind. And I think life and I think success is about grind until you get to where you're either content or you've succeeded. But God, help someone who goes to the grave never having made a mistake, because I know that means that they probably never tried.
And that is a really important one, because mistakes is how we learn. I mean, you've got young kids, you see them when they start to learn to ride a bike or start to walk. They don't make the first mistake and then never get up and walk again. But as adults, we seem to forget that. And I used to see that, and you probably saw it in accounting, but I used to see that in financial advice, where people would say things like, I've had a go at off-farm investing, Ben, and it's not for me. And I'd question them and say, well, why? What's the problem? And they said, oh, look, I bought an investment property, or I bought some shares and it just didn't work out. And the question always is, well, why didn't it work out? And what are you going to do going forward? And for most people, it's like, well, it didn't work out, so I'm not going to do it again. And I think that's a terrible way of looking at the world. But I'm also very conscious of the fact that not everyone is as resilient as others. And so a kick in the guts can be a lot harder to get up from.
Yeah, I've got a little story about this. And as you know my wife, and prior to kids, she had a great love of running. And, I don't know, I suppose I got dragged along for a bit. But we did the Gold Coast Marathon, and the first year I did it, and I was sort of like mid-20s, I thought 42 Ks I was wondering what I'd do that afternoon after I finished that run. But anyway, and I got to the 35, and so we're at the starting line. There's a lot of people, and they're strapped up, and they're 60s, 70s, and I thought, God, I don't know if I'll make it, but I'm pretty sure I'm twice the chance of these people. And I got to the 35K mark, and these people just were flying by me, and I'd hit the wall. Like I was struggling. So anyway, I grinded it out, and I made it in the 42K mark, and that was all good. So 11 months later, she decides that we're going to do it again. So I knew this time that I would struggle, that there would be a tough bit on that hill at the 35K mark. So rather than going without a plan and just saying, well, I'm just going to try, I knew that I had to have a plan to get past there. And all the way in my mind was like, righto, if I get past that mark, I can make the 42. And I think that's just the way that you've got to go into these things. And it's not about a mistake. I mean, you know that no path is ever going to be easy. You know that everything you start doing, there's going to be a point where you want to quit. It's going to be difficult. But if you start about with the mindset of acknowledging that things are going to be difficult and acknowledging that you're going to hit rock bottom and do all those sort of things, it doesn't hurt as much when you get there.
What was it? I think it was Mike Tyson said, and I hope it was Mike. I think he said you need a punch in the face plan. And so he used to, and I hope it was Mike Tyson, used to say that he used to visualize getting punched in the face. And he said, when you get punched in the face, he said, you're expecting it and you get on with it. So I used to always joke with clients, I'd say, we need a punch in the face plan. So when things go wrong, that's what we expected and we know what we've got to do.
Might have been the smartest thing that Big Mike ever said.
Might have been. Okay, excellent. And so you've managed to have a really great advantage by working in the accounting field for a large accounting firm and getting to deal with a whole lot of really smart producers. You've also served on a lot of boards. Surrounding yourself with good, smart, entrepreneurial, positive thinking people would have had to have also had a fairly large impact on yourself. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I absolutely, Ben. I'm not one that traditionally probably, seeks mentors, like official mentors, but I like being surrounded by people that are probably share the same passions as I do and the same sort of industries. And I get a lot from that. And I mean, that started right back when I was a kid. And, your father to this day remains someone that's fulfilled that role. Now, I don't talk to him about other aspects, but I've got that network where you might just say, well, okay, well, Ben's someone that can give me advice on the financial aspects of it. Chris Law, great at the production aspect. And I just think the more people you can know and the more people you surround yourself with in areas where you are genuinely interested and passionate about, it's not about to and fro advice. It's a conversation, it's a friendship, and it's to everyone's gain.
Yeah. And look, in financial advice, there was two things I really loved about the job. One is I got to talk to some really interesting, cool people, and I was actually interested in them. I was interested in what they were doing, why they were doing things, what works. And a lot of the time we'd have conversations about their business, the vision for the future, for their grandkids, etc. And the second one is I would take all that information and I'd never listen to just one person. I'd take information from people all around, I'd digest it, and then I'd make my own choices. And some of those choices, people would look at me and go, gee, where did you come up with that idea? But it just made sense to me. And I would listen to people that totally disagreed with me, and I'd listen to people that would agree with me, and I'd be able to formulate and tread my own path. And I think for young people coming through today, it's good to listen to other people, but surround yourself with people that have good intentions and do think bigger, but also you got to at some point back yourself in your decisions and convictions and get stuck into it. And the podcast is a prime one of those. I mean, I left a financial advice career and a business, in what I suppose you'd say was my prime, and I'm now doing podcasting. And the amount of people that look at me with this weird look on their face, like, why the hell are you doing that? And how are you going to make money out of that? But I've digested all the information. I know what I'm doing. I've got a plan, and I'm going to make it work. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what you've done, because I don't see all that many people out there doing what you're doing. And I've noticed in you that you do take a lot of information from all different areas and you process it quietly and then just formulate your own ideas and just get on with business.
Yeah, I think once you've got the framework and once you know your strengths, once you've got a network of not entirely like-minded, but once you've got a network of people with the same passions and same interests as you, I mean, I just find that the blocks fall into place. I think you've always got to have your ears open and your mouth shut. And I think anyone will hear more information than they need, but within that information will be the critical pieces that they can take and do something with.
Yeah, I came up with a bit of a concept a while ago about, there's three levels of success, and there's the information level, then there's a knowledge, and then there's a wisdom. And so information is everywhere. You can get on the internet, you can Google it, everyone's got an opinion. And now information doesn't equal success. You can have all the information in the world. What you need is knowledge. And to get to the knowledge level, you've got to have an understanding of that information. So you've got to be able to collate the information, then understand it. And then all the knowledge in the world's not necessarily going to make you successful until you've got the wisdom to implement it. And to go from knowledge to wisdom, you've got to basically have experience. And that comes from quite often the testing, the school of hard knocks, and being able to take criticism on the chin and adjust and get on with things and be resilient.
Yes, to that point, I think it's a never-ending journey to prepare yourself and have the ability and the base knowledge to be able to take information and do something with it. If you wind yourself back to school, and how often did you look at a textbook and think, I've got no idea what this is about?
More often than you think.
And it's just because you've got no base to build on. You just, you're falling out of a plane trying to read the manual.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Okay, Jeff, what's your definition of true wealth, mate?
Yeah, Ben, I think on the face value, most people would add a financial aspect into wealth and think, well, you've got enough assets or income to be comfortable, and that's important. But to me, wealth is having the ability and the opportunity to do what you're passionate about and what you ultimately love in life. So that's varied, and everyone will be different. But if you've got that ability and you can get out of bed each day and find satisfaction in some pursuit that lights you up, to me, I think you're living a good life, and I think you'll enjoy the path, whatever it may be.
Excellent. Where can we find you online, Jeff, if people want to reach out and learn a little bit more about 3R or yourself?
Yep. So if you head to the 3R website, which is just 3rbeef.com.au, there's plenty of information there. We've also got a Facebook page and an Instagram, so they're just 3R Livestock. You'll find them there. My details are on the website, and if anyone would like to give me a call or send an email, please do so.
And you're always happy to talk cows and bulls?
Very happy.
Excellent, Jeff. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. So thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you, Ben. Good chat. Thank you.
So before we finish up today, I just want to give you a couple of takeaways from the podcast. Now, I want to be really clear. This is not my area that I've been practicing for years and years and years. Podcasting is totally new to me, so I'm learning, and there's a number of things in here that we touched on that I think we possibly should have dug in a bit further, so I just thought I'd give you a bit of a summary of the key points I think that are really important. So number one is get involved and talk to a lot of different interesting people so that you get an expanded view of your world and all different points of view, and then crunch all that information internally and make a decision on which way you want to go forward. Remember the old quote, you're the average of the 5 people surround yourself with, so make sure you surround yourself with also really good quality people that think the way you do or have the same values as you, because as the old saying also goes, surround yourself with turkeys and you'll end up becoming a turkey. Next, keep your eyes open for opportunities, and if you do your research and run the numbers, then have a crack. Nothing is sadder than someone at the end of their life who's filled with regret for not having a go, and Jeff touched on that during the podcast. Next, don't be afraid of failure. Failure is just feedback and the absolute best teacher. Learn the lessons and do better next time. That's how you learn to walk and ride a bike and all these other things. So embrace failure. Next, do what you're passionate about, and work will never feel like work. You might have got that sense from Jeff that he absolutely loves what he does, and looking back at accounting, he could think of nothing worse than ever going back to that. Some people, their passion is about accounting, and good on them. Some people, their passion is about, boiler making. Whatever it might be in life, find what you're passionate about, and it won't feel like work. Now, the thing to remember, though, is you might have to do things first that you don't want to do to build up a solid base. So, for example, you might have to do an apprenticeship. You might have to do the hard yards. You might have to work harder than everyone else, but you have to build that solid base. And that's what Jeff did with his accounting. He was good at it. He enjoyed it, but it was a stepping stone to the next thing and a really solid base for him. Another part which we, again, didn't touch on, but I think that we should have, was the office work. Admin and financial controlling of your business is a magnifier of success. Just being good practically or technically is no longer enough. You have to balance it out. And in my experience as a financial advisor, I would see the people that had control of their office and their strategic planning did far better than the average Joe. And finally, long-term success comes from the compounding effect of taking action, learning and improving. You have to take action. You have to learn if you want to improve and do better. And the people I know that have been, wildly successful have all made mistakes. They've taken action, they've learnt, and they've improved over time. And I think that you have to have a mindset that it's never too late to have a go. It's never too late to learn, and you have to take action. Now, as Jeff said, if you want to learn more about Jeff, just Google 3R, so that's the number 3 and then the letter R, livestock, or look for Jeff and 3R up on Facebook and Instagram. Remember that you can join our new private Facebook group, the Financial Blokes Wealth and Wisdom, and thanks for joining me again today, and I'll catch up with a new episode in 2 weeks' time.